Michael's podcaster one tonight. He is a distinguished Toastmaster with over 10 years in Toastmasters and a proud member of Toastmasters Advanced. A technologist and former culinary professional, he is the creator and host of Voice for Chefs, a global podcast reaching listeners in 95 countries. Launched through his Toastmasters High Performance Leadership Project, the show amplifies voices through storytelling, connection, and service. Michael is passionate about helping others find their voice, lead with confidence, and make a lasting impact. Please welcome Michael Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. I'm very excited today. This has been a little bit of planning in the works, and very, very excited to introduce our next guest. Bruce Wawrzyniak has been podcasting since 2014. He's hosted more than 1,000 episodes over time. He has never missed a week, which is incredible. Once with both his Now Hear This entertainment podcast and Catholic Sports Radio podcast, which are 12 and 7 years old, respectively. Bruce runs the Florida Podcaster Association. He's also spoken about podcasting at events ranging from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., to Orlando, and even in the UK. And something really special, he connected with our own Fred Bergeron at Podfest. And that's how I got connected to him. So I'm very excited to welcome Bruce. Bruce, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Michael.
My first curiosity, can you share a little bit about your background with us and what led you into podcasting and producing 2 shows?
My background pre-podcasting and still is in publicity. I've been a publicist for many years. I have my own agency, but it goes back to starting out of college. I worked for 10 seasons for a National Hockey League team in PR. They were also operating a pro indoor lacrosse team that I fell in love with so much that I was doing 2 jobs at once, PR for the hockey team, and I was director of public relations for the lacrosse team. And long story short, they kind of retooled the whole structure of the league. And so they hired me to be the vice president of public relations at the league office. Did that for 3 years. They were talking about relocating. It didn't align with where I wanted to be geographically, literally. And so I made the big leap. And more than 25 years ago, I moved to Florida. And I freelanced for 3 different full-service agencies for 1.5 years before getting a job in the Olympic movement. And I worked in the Olympic movement for 10.5 years, including being the chief press officer at 2 Summer Olympic Games, traveled all over the world, and eventually left that to go all in with the PR agency that I still own and operate today.
Wow, that's truly amazing. That's a lot for us to take in today. I mean, that's really a lot of accomplishments, and it's very inspirational. When you did the podcast shift from being a marketing tool to becoming a true platform serving specifically the music community with Now Hear This, can you tell us about that? How did that change happen? How would you describe like connecting to a community for us?
It's important that your attendees, your members understand first that when I got the idea to start Now Hear This Entertainment, I thought it was common sense. I'm amazed present day at the occasional news items that I'll read in the podcast industry about, they'll give you a show title and they say, how many different people have a podcast with the same name? And because my company was called Now Hear This, back in late 2013, when I was behind the scenes formulating this podcast I was going to launch, I decided I should probably call it Now Hear This. And I thought it was common sense. I looked up online and I saw that somebody was already doing a podcast called Now Hear This.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm going to essentially be interviewing guests who are having success in entertainment, primarily music. So what if I tacked on that 4th word? So that's how I landed at Now Hear This Entertainment. And yes, as you mentioned, Michael, my initial thinking was, this will be a great marketing tool. I was overwhelmingly focused at the time on serving music only clients. So I thought if I do these music interviews on the podcast, maybe someone will be listening in insert city here, and he or she will say, this Bruce guy sounds like he knows his stuff. I wonder if he can manage and promote me from across the miles. And as I really started to get some momentum, as the show really started to grow, and as my business started to change over the years, I started to notice that almost without trying, I had kind of moved away from this has to be something that gets me clients to just really getting good at the show, making sure I was doing everything I could to grow the audience, but then also recognizing what a great tool it was becoming, partially as it relates to, and this, I love that we can do this as podcasters. You ask the questions that you want to know the answer to. And of course, if you dress it up the right way, it's presented as such that all kinds of people want to know the answer. And because the level of guests I was having were so significant, I thought these people are becoming real good contacts for me to help me serve my music clients. So I was interviewing the likes of Roy Orbison Jr. I interviewed the lead guitar player for Garth Brooks, the drummer for Cheap Trick, the bass player for Pink, trumpet player for Billy Joel, fiddle player for Taylor Swift. I was interviewing Grammy Award winners, Emmy Award winners, Rock and Roll Hall of Famers, people who had been on American Idol, The Voice, America's Got Talent, The X Factor, someone who even won The Voice. And I started realizing that these conversations that I had been having with them, mind you, and hopefully everyone on this call knows about listennotes.com. Listennotes.com, among other things, will show you what the average length of your episode is. And the average length of a Now Hear This Entertainment episode is 54 minutes, which means I'm probably talking to the person for over an hour by the time that we're done. So there's the foundation for a relationship there. And I noticed, okay, I need to really take advantage of the value of these contacts that I'm making. And so that's really kind of where I've landed over the last several years, Michael.
I love that. And I would say, I'm going to pause for a minute and say, this is truly vaunted. This is absolutely vaunted. What do you feel when somebody tells you that your episodes are too long? I hear that from my end. I like a 45-minute to an hour interview because it helps me develop the stories with my chefs. I feel like you have a very similar perspective. And, you know, so you have long form interviews as opposed to, short 20-minute interviews where people say, oh, it's better for marketing. Obviously, you know how to market. But what do you say to someone when they say that? I mean, to me, that's a very frustrating thing because I feel like I prefer the long form because it can really get into an episode.
It's interesting that we're having this conversation at the time that we are, because I just had a guest on. He's a real well-known songwriter in Nashville. And what I talked to him about, my question was, have you ever performed an original song that you haven't recorded it, you haven't released it, you're just kind of testing it out on audiences, and you get some negative feedback to where you say, gosh, maybe I need to make some changes to this song. Mm-hmm. And he said, boy, Bruce, I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but I don't really recall ever getting any negative feedback. And he laughed it off. And we had a healthy discussion where I really turned it into, well, what advice would you have for up and comers who do start to get that negative feedback? And what we landed on, Michael, was if you hear it from one person, and especially if it's not from someone in the music business, you smile and nod and say, well, thanks for listening anyways. And so I'm going a long way to answer your question the same way, that if one person said to me, your episodes are too long, I'd say, well, it's unfortunate. I guess you can't please all the people all the time, but I would stick with it. If there was this overwhelming landslide of people that were saying, this is unlistenable, this is way too long, I probably would have taken a look at it. It does go back to when I first put the show together all those years ago. And as a publicist, I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was a show where my clients could really tell their story and not just do the typical 5 to 7 minute interview where they're getting asked predictable questions. So it was very deliberate on my part that I wanted to make these long form interviews. Never mind the fact, and please don't misunderstand me, I am by no means putting myself in the same category as Joe Rogan or Bill Simmons or some that, But I love the Bill Simmons podcast, and sometimes his episodes are 2.5 hours. Joe Rogan, we all know his episodes go 4 hours.
Yep.
And I say that if that's what fits what you're doing, they always talk about the answer to the question, what is the ideal length of a podcast episode? And it's once you get to the point where you're talking just for the sake of talking, now your episode is too long. And I don't find that I'm getting to that 45, 50, 55, 60-minute mark just rambling because I feel like going on and on.
I love that because I feel that way too. I'm not sure, but I wonder if some musicians, even though they're on stage, are shy or introverted. And maybe it takes a little bit of time to bring the stories out when you're interviewing. I'm curious about that, if you experience that.
There are some. I've done 630. I should know this. I think I'm up to 631 episodes of Now
Wow.
Hear This Entertainment. And there's some that will talk about, I'm a little nervous before we start, right before I hit the record button. And many, many years ago, I heard Howard Stern, he would tell a guest, it's okay, it's nobody listening, it's just you and me. And I've kind of carried that joke, and I'll say, it's okay, it's just two of us talking, we just happen to be recording it, that's all. And
Yeah.
I think my approach, my demeanor, because I'm not asking hard-hitting questions, I'm not trying to back them into a corner, and because I kind of start off, talking about the things they want to talk about, I make sure we get the predictable stuff in early. I think that makes them more comfortable, and all of a sudden they don't realize that, wow, I've been talking to this guy for 40 minutes and there's still more to go.
Wow. Well, you've mentioned a few famous or semi-famous musicians, and my jaw drops when you talk about it because, like, Bono is somebody I've always wanted to meet, and I don't know if you ever have the chance to interview somebody from U2, but my jaw would completely drop. But what I'm thinking is, have you had any memorable guests on, and what made those conversations stand out for you? It doesn't have to be anybody famous, but it's just somebody that really moved you, because I've had those experiences and they're powerful. And could you share one or two of those?
Well, I'll tell two. One is Roy Orbison Jr. And the interesting lesson with Roy Jr. was I went into that really disciplining myself and saying, this guy probably gets asked about his father all the time. So Bruce, make the interview about Roy Jr. As much as you're going to want to ask about his father, make the interview about him. And Roy Jr. just wanted to talk all about his dad. And I thought, I'm getting goosebumps right now, actually. I would love it if someone would let me talk all about my dad. And at the same time, he's more or less, a steward of the legacy and the foundation and things like that, and carrying on all that his father did over the years, and a lot of the things that still go on in his behalf. So that did stand out to me, that I went into it preparing one way, and he was totally happy to go the other way. And I always say it's not about me, it's about the guests, it's about the audience. And if that's the way he wanted it to go, so be it. In fact, we hit it off so nicely that when I hit the stop button, he told me, next time you come to Nashville, let me know, let's get lunch, I'll take you over to the Songwriters Hall of Fame, etc. And instead, he just had me to his house. How amazing was that? Yeah. And the other one is, there's a fella in Nashville, he's a songwriter named Blue Foley. And Blue, I was really impressed that he did not mind coming on the podcast and making himself vulnerable, where he admitted publicly all the songs. For those that don't know, in the music business, when they refer to a cut, it means that a song that you wrote actually gets recorded by an artist. So they could put out an album with 11 songs on it, and if one of those songs was written or co-written by you, you say that you got a cut on their album. And Blue said that over the previous 12 months, over the last 12 years, I think the number was something like 23 cuts that he had. And he said, Bruce, from those 23 cuts, I have made 0. I said,
Wow.
You've made 0? How is that possible? And so he went on to kind of talk about what goes on in the music business and some of the changes that he was going to make, right, in his business model, and the shift that he was going to make as a result, because you do hear about all the success of someone like that, and you think, oh, well, they must be rolling in the dough. And he was talking about how a lot of these are indie artists, and the indie artists aren't making any money to begin with. but it also proved as a good resource for me for future episodes because I'm such a big advocate of promoting your past episodes. It became a great tool for me on future conversations to say, if you never heard my interview with Blue Foley, go back and listen to that one. He revealed how much he made, and it's very eye-opening. And so that sends people into that whole funnel that I like to get people into, which is then when they go listen to the Blue Foley episode, they hear me on that one saying, if you never heard my interview with so-and-so, and then they just keep going back.
Awesome.
And, it starts off with, they came for this guest over here, and all of a sudden they realize that I like this Bruce guy and I like his show.
I love it. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So taking things on a different turn, we talked about this in our pre-interview, and I love that conversation. How do you handle guests who are long-winded or difficult to manage on the air? Because I'm sure with all these episodes, you've had a few. And do you have any advice for us as podcasters on how we could tackle that challenge?
I remember that you and I talked about this in our pre-interview, and didn't I just have it happen to me last week with the Catholic Sports Radio interview? Now, Catholic Sports Radio, I do try to keep those. I think Listen Notes says my average episode is something like 32 minutes. In a perfect world, it would be a little less than that. It would be between 25 and 30. And I had somebody, mind you, he was so passionate and just so joyful about what he does, but it was too much for me. And I knew that there were two more questions I wanted to ask him. So when he came up for air, I said, ironically, his name is Mike, said, Mike, we're out of time. Just real quick, 25 words or less. Tell the audience about XYZ. And you could tell that he got it, that the bell had sounded for him. And I didn't count, but I would be surprised if it was more than 25 words. And then I closed with a real quick, easy one that the message had already been sent. So he understood that because I said we're out of time, that second question, he also needed to keep brief. So there was someone else on Now Hear This Entertainment where, again, because there's this beautiful thing called post-production, you can jump in. And I had asked this fella about his band's latest album. And as I started to listen to his answer, I thought, I think he's about to describe every single song on the album. And by the time he was talking about the third track, I jumped in, and I don't want to say his name. So I said, so-and-so, hold on. We're going to cut all this out. We're going to reset. I'm going to have you restart the answer. I said, I think it sounds to me like you're going track by track. We don't have that kind of time. So I just need you to kind of give us a global view of the album itself. And he was a great sport about it. He totally understood. I said, I'm going to count you back in. 3, 2, 1. And off he went with a much more condensed answer. So I think it's just kind of taking ownership and knowing that it's your show and you can do that, and to not be so courteous that all of a sudden it does turn into a 87-minute episode that you would have otherwise never intended.
That's an amazing answer. And I mean, you've just given us all really good advice for interview style podcasting. What other advice would you give to new podcasters trying to connect authentically with their audience?
I think that's exactly it. I think that there's a tendency to say, okay, I started this podcast. I have to become somebody now. I have to put on a show, so to speak, instead of exhaling, getting the nerves out, focusing on what your expertise is, especially if you're doing a solo show and you have to carry the entire episode. The minute that you start to drift off, it's kind of like being a chronic liar. You always have to remember those lies and stick to them. So I think if you stick to what you know and what you want to establish yourself as the expert in, if you start going off into some tangent that either A, is going to lose people because they're going to say, why is he talking about baking when this is supposed to be a music interview show? And you start to lose focus. I think the important thing is, why did you start the show? What are you trying to accomplish with it? And how can you be the expert in it while making sure that you're entertaining the audience? You're not lecturing them. You're not passing yourself off as, someone that's been a chef for 25 years when maybe you've been doing it for 3 or 4. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think you just need to identify to the audience what qualifies you to be hosting that podcast. Just like I did with Now Hear This Entertainment, I made sure that I told people right out of the gate who I was, what I do. And with Catholic Sports Radio, I talked about that background that I did at the beginning of this conversation of all the time that I spent working in sports and the fact that I'm a cradle Catholic and a longtime podcaster.
Fantastic. So after more than a decade of weekly episodes, what still excites you about pressing record?
Well, the guests, certainly. I just enjoy every conversation. It's the one part of my day where I can just block out everything else that's going on. No matter how busy I am, no matter what other emotions I have, I'm going to show up at the mic with a smile, like I just did as I said that. I always challenge myself, still to this day, after more than 1,000 episodes. I make sure that before I start my intro, I've got a big smile on my face so that that will come through to the audience. But those guests and the fact that everybody has a different story, there's certain people, obviously, that you'll get more excited about than others. But at the same time, sometimes you have a guest that it's not that you're not looking forward to them. You're just not as excited as you are about others. And all of a sudden, they end up being a home run and you just really hit it off. There was somebody I just had the other day that I interviewed for Now Hear This Entertainment. I think this was 2 days ago that she called in. She had interested me enough that I booked her. But I really didn't have any expectations. It doesn't mean I had low expectations. I just thought, okay, here we go. Another interview and let's see where this goes. And we just had a blast. And the fact that after 630 plus interviews
right there.
on Now Hear This Entertainment, I can still find enjoyment from somebody. It shows you that you're going to get great conversation and you may learn something. You may get emotional. There's going to be something you're going to take away from it other than, okay, that's another one. Put it on the pile, put it in the queue.
Right. I love that because I think about the same thing for myself. I'm going on 5 years and it's been the greatest journey for me that I can imagine. Meeting people all over the world, making those connections.
Yeah, and there's also the factor
incredible.
of you don't know what it's going to turn into connection wise for you. I've Catholic Sports Radio in particular, I get so many other guests from the guests that I interview.
Right.
And a lot of times you never see it coming. So there's also that element of what excites you. This could be someone who turns me on to someone that I'd otherwise never get anywhere near.
Yeah, it's amazing the doors that open as you've talked about, yeah, I'm thrilled about that. So Bruce, I'm going to wrap up, but are there any last words that you want to share with our Toastmaster community or anyone in general about podcasting, about Now Hear This, or any of the work that you've done?
Yeah, just a couple things. Number one is I don't mind saying that after more than 12 years and more than 1,000 episodes, I still do audio only. I don't do video podcasts. I just don't have the bandwidth in more ways than one, and I'm perfectly happy with it. So if there's anyone that is just doing audio or just starting into it and feels this added pressure, it's okay to just do audio. The other thing is that for Catholic Sports Radio, probably 96% of my interviews, 97% are done remotely. It's a rare thing. Tomorrow is going to be episode 372, and I think there have been 5, maybe 6 that I've ever done in person. At the same time, I'm going to stand here and tell you the benefit of going out and doing in-person interviews. Podcasting will open a lot of doors for you if you try. Podcasting has become so widely embraced that you can get into events because you're coming there, quote unquote, to cover the event. And I get a lot of opportunities where I do in-person interviews, especially for Now Hear This Entertainment. And then you get your foot in the door with a different organization, with contacts that you otherwise would not have made if you just stayed home and did it remotely. So don't be bashful if the opportunity is there to get yourself out to events where you can record in person. It's very, very valuable.
Well, thank you again, Bruce. And please put your contact information in the chat for